Hello and welcome back to the Volks Wizard channel. Now, long-term viewers may remember that not long after I bought my Mark 7 Golf GTI Clubsport S in February 2023, I had an issue with a rattle from the front end. I replaced numerous suspension components and never got to the bottom of it. But after driving it and listening carefully for the year since I gave up trying to fix it, I think I have the answer, and that is, it's the brake pads. And that's because they're loose in the caliper and they're moving when you're going over bumps, and that's causing the rattle. What's confirmed this is that if you select reverse and go backwards after driving forwards for a long time, you can hear the pads move in the caliper, and they move with a clank, and that means they're loose. So for what it costs to replace the pads, I think it's worth doing this just to see if it fixes the problem. The other clue is that if you grab the caliper and move it with your hand, you can hear a noise as well. In today's video, we're going to change the brake pads on my Mark 7 Golf GTI Clubsport S. We're not going to fit just normal pads. We're going to fit some uprated pads because the car's going on track again in a few days. And the good news is this process is the same for numerous GTIs and Rs. So basically every Mark 7 with 230 horsepower and above will have the same process. It's got the same calipers. You might have two-piece discs like you have on the Clubsport S or the TCR, but if you've got single ones like on the Golf Rs, it's the same process as well. So let's fit some new brake pads and hopefully shut the rattling up on my Mark 7 Golf GTI Clubsport S. Okay, let's start off then by looking at the tools and parts required, starting with the pads. So I've used EBC Yellow Stuff before on track project cars and they've been brilliant, but I was recommended EBC Blue because they're even better on track and they're not much more expensive, about £5 more. The reason they're better is because they've got a better friction coefficient, so they just work better. They've got less fade as well, and they last longer. So they're a little bit more track focused than the Yellow Stuffs, but they're still E90 approved, which means you don't have to tell your insurance company if you've fitted them. They're the same pads inner and outer, it's just the offside inner has got this pad wear sensor on it. Tools, well, you need to get the wheels off, so a brace and a torque wrench for putting the studs back in at the correct torque, lock and wheel block key, wheel nut cap removal tool, 13mm socket on a ratchet, 17mm spanner, that's to get the caliper off, a flat blade screwdriver because you always need one, probably in this case to get the caliper off once you've undone it, a wire brush to clean everything up. And this tool is optional, but it helps you push the piston back into the caliper, but you can also do that by levering it against one of the old brake pads if you wish. I'm going to very selectively use some ceramic brake grease on the back of the pad and also have a look at the sliders for the caliper and see how much grease they've got left, and if they haven't got much, I'll add some more, but that's designed for brakes because it's high temperature. Copper grease isn't really recommended because it's metallic and that can affect ABS systems. Also, you need a jack to raise the car up, and I've forgotten to get it out. Definitely need one of these. Okay, let's start off then by getting the car in the air. Now I use these rubber pads that are really cheap off eBay and they're grooved so they fit perfectly into the jacking point on Mark 7s. Okay, we'll get the wheel off first and then we'll put the axle stand in position because it's a lot easier that way around. Also, it's a good idea to loosen your bolts before you raise the car because it's impossible to put a lot of torque onto them when the car's raised. And Pretoria, a lightweight wheel, does have its benefits. Okay, so there is the caliper, single piston disappointingly, but yeah, it does the job. In the longer term I really want to upgrade these, and even the Mark 8 ones, a two piston with a bigger two-piece disc, they would I think be perfect, not too heavy and keeping them OEM. Okay, let's get the axle stand in place. Okay, so you need to undo the 30mm outer bolt and hold this nut while you do it, otherwise it'll turn, but we'll just break it off first. It shouldn't be too tight. Okay, so straight away the inner bit is rotating, so I do need to buy a new ratchet, you know. Okay, there we go. Not too difficult. When I started working on cars, a very experienced mechanic warned me that you do not need to over tighten these because it's not keeping the caliper on the carrier so much because all the braking force is in the other direction. So yeah, make sure you don't overdo those. So same again, 13. And then let's hold that with the 17. Okay, so the caliper is loose now, but there'll be a bit of resistance because the pads have been in there a long time, so we'll just carefully lever it off. We don't want to damage the paint. There we go. Actually, because the pads are loose, that came off a bit more easily than usual. And that's really important to not let this hang by the weight of the flexi hose. What I do is place them onto the strut like that, but you just got to be careful if you're going to whack stuff with a hammer, like to get a disc off, which we're not doing today. You don't want that to fall. So here are the pads, and as expected, they're actually quite easy to get out, which isn't usually the case. And it's these springy bits that keep them secure into the caliper, and I don't think they're very good. I mean, look at that. That doesn't even look like that one. Let's compare that to a new one. Yeah, so you can see there's a lot more spring to this one than there is to this one, so that bodes well. Interesting how that's not a particularly smooth surface on there. So maybe these pads, even though they're not worn out, they've probably had maybe too many heat cycles and yeah, ready for replacement. Let's see how the inner one comes out. That's a little bit tighter. Okay. So yeah, not bad, but there is some fallout there. Now I've turned the steering so you can see this a bit better. It's usually the classic time for the caliper to fall off the strut, so I've cable tied that in position. Let's just clean these bits off. And for good measure, give them a bit of a spray with some brake cleaner that gets off the residue. Okay, let's have a look at the sliders then. So yeah, there's a bit of grease on there. That's not too bad, actually. So I'll leave that as it is. And that's the same. Okay, so I've lightly coated the pads with some ceramic grease. You have to bear in mind the temperatures these are going to be subject to, so you really don't want to put too much on there. This is just the bare minimum to stop squeal, though I don't really mind too much about squeal. So that's where the caliper touches on that side, and that's where the piston touches on that side. So let's fit them now. You can see the springs there. This is a really important bit that some mechanics actually get wrong. So I'm going to slot the back in first, and then use this flat blade screwdriver to push the spring in. And that's it. And then again at the top, let's do it the other way around. There we go. So straight away you can feel there's tension in there, which was lacking from the old ones. Okay, same again on the inside. Yep. Perfect. Okay, now we need to put the piston back in the caliper. Because the pads aren't particularly worn out, it's not too far out actually. And like I said, you can use a screwdriver and the old pads and lever either when they're still in the carrier, or you can use a proper tool. By the way, you should check your brake fluid level, because if the pads have been low and you put brake fluid in, or you've had a brake fluid change in the meantime, there could be too much brake fluid and it could be coming out. So it's not the end of the world, but if it does leak, then make sure you pour some normal water on it and that will stop it doing any damage. And it's also now a good time to give them a bit of a clean up with some brake cleaner. Okay, now it's time to refit the caliper. So it will be tight, but not too tight. Okay, so that's an easy caliper to fit. Some of them have to be pivoted in from a certain angle, but this just pushes straight on. So let's just thread the 13 mils back into position. Okay, now let's nip the bolts up. Okay, that's one side done. Now we need to move over to the off side, where it's a tiny little bit more complicated.
I genuinely mean a tiny bit more complicated, because all you have on this side you don't have on the other side is the pad wear sensor, and all you have to do is just unclip that from its mounting and then reattach it when you fit the new pads.
Okay, that's the dirty work done, but you haven't finished yet. There are a few safety related things you now need to do. The most important, and the thing that catches lots of mechanics out, is to make sure you reset the brake pads by pressing the pedal numerous times, because if you don't, the first time you press it, the pedal will go to the floor, which is not a very nice experience. Ask me how I know. The other things you need to do is, once you've done that, check the brake fluid level, make sure it's very close to the max. And you also need to torque the wheel bolts as well if you haven't already. And you need to bed the brakes in. Now I'm fitting new pads to old discs, and that means that it takes quite a long time for the pads to bed in, because the brake surface, the disc surface won't be perfectly smooth. The pad will, so it will take a little bit longer to do that. EBC brake pads are designed to be self-bedding in if you use them on the road, but when you use them on track, particularly people who actually fit them at track days or race days, there is a procedure you need to follow that's specified on their website to get the correct bedding in procedure and therefore the correct performance.
And just 3 days after fitting them, having followed said bedding in procedure, it was time to test them at a circuit notoriously hard on brakes, Bedford Autodrome's 3.8 mile GT circuit. The first few laps did produce some judder, which was probably from some transfer from the old brake pads, but once this was burned off, the Blue Stuff felt incredible. The big difference from the stock pads is increased feel. As you can see, well, actually here in this video, I repeatedly get the brakes to almost lock up, but without triggering the ABS, and even during very long and hard sessions, their performance was totally consistent with zero fade, even though their actual braking performance felt stronger than the stock pads. This was also the first time in a long time that I'd been on track on normal road tyres rather than semi-slicks. Goodyear promote their Eagle F1 Supersport as suitable for track as well as normal road use, and no doubt helped by the cool and damp conditions keeping temperatures low, they were very impressive. It was also the first time I'd been on track in my Clubsport S with the standard lightweight Pretoria wheels, and the reduced rotational mass combined with the progressive tyres and superior pads meant I had the best track driving ever. See for yourself with this full lap chasing down a highly modified Audi S3 saloon. As ever guys, thanks for watching this Volks with a video. Keep subscribing, keep commenting, and see you for the next one very soon.